Welcome everybody to the Community and Economic Development Committee meeting. I'm John Redmond.
I'm Pete Peterson. Dean Gaines Assembly House.
Andy Honest, Clerk's Office.
Forrest Dunbar.
And Chris, you're on the phone?
Yes.
Thank you.
And Dick. Is Dick on the phone?
Dick is not.
Okay,
So you do have a quorum with those present.
okay, so we have a quorum. Thanks. And is that mostly matters with we're doing marijuana? I guess this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, anything that the committee would like to vote on and recommend to the assembly, you would need a quorum.
Okay, let's go ahead and go around. We'll start. Jed?
Jedediah Smith, Alaska Alcohol Marijuana Control Office. John Redmond, Great Northern Cannabis. Tim? Drew Potter. Ken Coffey.
Jan Alexi, Sarah Oaks with Alaska Charter.
All right, thank you. So we have three things on the agenda today. And the first one is discussion of removal of debt disclosure requirement for marijuana license transfer applications. And this lingers, I think, from some time ago. We made some changes, and then we had talked about removing this piece. And for some reason, we didn't do it. I don't think because it wasn't in the title or something like that. Dean, can you refresh our memory? That would be this piece of paper.
I would need some time to think about this before I could really refresh you. I'm not entirely certain.
Where did this come from?
I think we might have talked about.
Hang in there, Chris.
Chris, you alright, man?
Sorry, I thought I was muted.
Oh, do you want me to mute you?
No, I got it. I'll do it on the phone, not the car. And yes, I am surviving.
Okay. Do you want me to address this?
Well, I think, and I say this with a grain of salt, that we might have talked about removing the provisions to submit an application to transfer when it was a non-controlling interest. This section is transfer of controlling interest. So I'm not sure I would want to scrutinize this a little more before comment on why we were going to remove. But if anybody else recalls,
I think
welcome to comment.
part of it was a comment from the industry. It was talking about all of the debts being reported whenever a transfer application is, and that's language that came over from state regulations. And so I recall the conversation was that for like our purposes, reporting all of the business debt, we do research for municipal taxes and fees. So this kind of didn't really pertain to us, was my recollection.
That was my recollection.
Dean?
Yeah, I guess I remember a little bit. We're only looking out to C2, and I remember some discussion where why does the municipality, the state's already overseeing this, and businesses viability, and how much debt that has, and debt to equity ratios, stuff like that. Why would the municipality worry about it and have to review the same information? And we're mostly concerned, we already have that in other provisions about in licensees, debts to the municipality, taxes, or unpaid fees or fines and things like that. And not about other creditors.
Right. Yeah, I think it was fairly simple. It was just, why ask for information we don't need? It's not something relevant to our decision. And as a business, to give that information away is very proprietary.
Yeah.
And I don't remember when this is from. I just had a note of something to work on later, and we had time later. So my recommendation would be to just have an ordinance to delete that. So. Chris, do you know what we're talking about? Do you know the piece of paper in front of us?
Yeah, I understand the details of this.
What was that?
He said, yeah, I understand.
Okay.
Well,
Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so, is this something that the state is currently doing, and so we had it in our code so that they would match?
Yeah, so on the other side is the state statute that ours came from, and so it's the number 2 as well.
So we just
So it was
mirrored
just,
them
yep.
and brought in a requirement we don't actually need. Okay.
Jed? Can you speak on this a bit? I mean, what do you guys, when you're reviewing applications, use that information in any way? Are we missing something?
I mean, this might be something that's carried over from the alcohol statute in terms of how a license is approved. I'm not exactly sure. I can get back to you on
Okay, but are you involved with the reviewing licenses and you would get this piece of information?
that. I'm not directly
No,
involved.
okay.
in
Jana?
So basically what happens is we apply for a transfer and so the state lists all the debts and liens that are in bad standing. So not necessarily like a tax plan with the Alaska Revenue Department unless we're like not in good standing, right? And then also I think it's for if there are liens filed against the license, which I don't think we've actually had yet. I haven't found any. And so for alcohol, if there's liens, then it can't be transferred until that lien is kind of resolved in one way or another. So I think that state is trying to capture that. It's kind of duplicative for the muni. It's also like another, invasion of the privacy of the business too. So it's like we already do it on the state side, and they already make that analysis. It won't actually approve the transfer if there's creditors listed that aren't resolved, and also then the creditors get noticed. And so it seems like it's covered on the state side.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So they don't refuse to give someone a renewal of their license because they have debts or anything, right? That hasn't happened yet, has it?
So this is for a transfer.
This is just for transfer.
Transfers have been held up.
Okay.
Yeah.
For debt and for failure to pay taxes.
Okay. All right, thanks.
So I guess, so did the state AMCO hold up the transfer because of the debt, or is it just?
Well, the board would.
The control board.
The Marijuana Control Board or the Alcohol Control Board.
So if there's any debt, this company has a bunch of debt and wants to transfer the license, you say, no, you can't transfer it until you get rid of that debt?
No,
I don't think
until
that
the
it's
creditor,
that.
yeah, sorry, the creditor can say, I don't object to this, because and it's only if it's in bad standing, so only if like, they had a mechanic's lien and the mechanic, they listed it there, and then the mechanic lien, here people got notice of it and said, we object to this. So those kinds of arrangements, but they have to provide, substantial proof that there's this bad debt.
So are people listing all the debts, so anything they owe anyone?
Only if it's not in good standing.
Oh, because that's not spelled out here. So
Yeah,
that
it's
should
not
become
spelled out here,
policy.
but I mean, then you're listing like your mortgage for your house.
Yeah, that's odd.
It's not spelled out, but the advice that's come from the AMCO staff has been that it should only be things that are past due. The intent, sorry, I don't do this anymore on the marijuana side, but
She used to work for the Alcohol Control Board.
yeah. The intent was to just make sure that if there is any outstanding debt that's past due, or there are any liens on the license, that gets paid, or at least that there is a plan set up for when the license is sold or transferred, that any money that the seller would get would go towards satisfying those debts, so that you don't have creditors who get left with nothing.
So as you can see, it would kind of complicate the muni process if you kind of duplicated that, because it's kind
And
of
we don't collect fees for license transfers or anything, so it kind of is moot for us.
Okay. Dean?
Sort of relevant to this subject specifically is another section in regulation and code. In our code 108080 about denial of a license application, subsection C is about applications for transfers, and C2, and it's identical to the state regulation at 3A C30680. C2 says the assembly will deny an application for transfer if the assembly finds, and I'm sort of paraphrasing, cutting out some language, the transfer has not paid all debts or taxes arising from the operation of the business licensed under this chapter, unless the transferor gives the security for the payment of the debts or taxes satisfactory to the creditor or taxing authority. So this information sort of gives the basis to require some sort of security or guarantee to be filed or submitted in order to approve the transfer. I think I've seen similar concepts in our other, usually under our municipal taxes chapter or Title 12 for example, motor vehicle rental tax, and sometimes required to give security that's based on an average amount that a business of that size might pay in taxes times 2 or something like that. I would have to look up the formula. But this is sort of, I think, ties into this. If we're going to remove this, we might want to look at also 1080 C2 and changing that language.
Okay, well, that's interesting. So that we could deny a transfer if they have bad debt, and that's stated somewhere else.
Excuse me.
Yeah, 1080 C2. We could deny the transfer if they have bad debt unless they offer security, guarantee, or some sort of bond.
Can I ask?
Yeah,
Federal
please.
credit.
What's the policy rationale for that? If it's debt to the municipality, I totally understand. But what's our policy justification for getting involved in a private dispute between two businesses or whatever it is? Why should we care who holds that license?
You know, I can't say specifically, but the rationale for this being in our code is that when this all was first enacted, we were copying the state's first standard regulations, and we just copied what they did in their regulation 30680.
And the portion that Dean was talking about, that's the 108080, does come from the liquor licensing stuff also. So there's a portion for liquor licensing where the assembly reviews those applications based off of standards, and that's listed in there as well.
I still don't understand the policy reason for having that be a standard. It seems like we're inserting ourselves in private disputes that don't really impact us.
Well, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this type of thing has been a practice for a long time. Say a contractor does some work to remodel a building for somebody, and the guy's trying to get his final approval, final inspections to open up his business. This guy puts a lien on that business until he gets his money. That's been going on for a long, long period of time. So I think that might be where this originally got started. Whether we need it for marijuana licenses, I don't know. That's a
But if
question.
someone put a lien on your building, you could still get your certificate of occupancy. I mean, that's between you and that contractor, because the city doesn't get it. Do you know of some alcohol licenses that have been, the transfers have been denied because of debt? I'm looking at Mandy. But anyone could ask.
I have not heard of it, but we wouldn't get the application from the state if they were not accepted based off of the debt.
Well, when you can make it this far. Are you aware of any in Anchorage that have been denied because they had bad debt? Like a transfer?
I don't think that there were any that were denied. Typically, the procedure is that the ABC board will approve the transfer with delegation pending satisfaction of the creditors. So there might have been one or two, I don't think specific to Anchorage, that ended up being denied because they were never satisfied and they were sitting in limbo for so long, but it's very infrequent. Usually it's satisfied.
I mean, what you're describing is basically the state subsidizing private industry to act as a debt collector, or a court even. And I suppose that's how the liquor industry is set up, and so be it. But I don't see the reason the city would do that in this context.
So is there parallel? Is there parallel wording in our alcohol laws with asking for this debt?
I'm not sure. I'm trying to find it now. It's hard for,
It's
but
Title II.
the
Title II,
regulations.
yeah.
So there is a parallel. Well, I wouldn't mind getting rid of it in both sections if we do it. If it's not something we use, not something that's useful.
And got one other thing about that too. I mean, the state is has a large operation and has the MCO office. We have the clerk's office, right? And if we're asking the clerk's office, who are burdened with a lot of things, to do this as well, I think that's. So yeah, I'm in favor of getting rid of it as well. I think that we have a much smaller operation. This is sort of outside of our core function.
But do you think also look at it for the alcohol or just focus on marijuana?
I mean, yeah, I would be in favor of getting ready for both, but I'm willing to be persuaded. If someone can come here and make a compelling argument for why we do it in the first place, and if we do it, and if we're not just duplicating the efforts of the state, then I'm willing to listen to it. But if it's not, then let's clean up our code and get it out of there.
Chris, any thoughts?
I actually agree that this is overkill, and we don't have the staff to manage it, and let's get out of the way.
So we have in front of us, we're looking at the marijuana license. If we were to ask, kind of get something prepared by Dean, also doing a similar removal of the debt requirement from alcohol, is that something you'd look at?
Well, we don't grant an actual alcohol license, and so I think it's fine to take it out, but it's really important on the cannabis side because we actually grant a dual license.
Yeah, okay, good, thank you. So I guess what we do is, that, Dean, can you write up some kind of ordinance that would delete in this C2 where it says listing all debts of the business, and also that related section then that uses that information from the cannabis?
Sure, maybe Ms. Ellis can help.
And then also, well, whoever can do it, I guess. And then also take a look and see if we can do the same parallel act for the alcohol section. And I think if we get that presented to us, then we can move forward and look at it. Mandy?
So I will say, as like a processing point of view, we do review for the municipal taxes, fees, and fines, and I have not received any debt information from just a couple of, there may be one transfer of marijuana, and so it doesn't really weigh too much into ours. I guess mostly because dealing with the finance department, we kind of don't have that function to go and manage dealing with other creditors. So I do agree that it's a better state function.
Okay.
We really don't have the capabilities.
Yeah, I was trying to think, other than just being, sort of accidentally brought over from the state law, I'm trying to think why it would be there at all. Is there a concern about when we pursue our debts, we have to, in a state court, line them up after private debts? But I don't think that's the case. I think, first of all, we have primacy, and secondly, we're talking about granting our own license, so the court should not be involved. I don't know. It's a mystery.
And I mean, part of it too is we don't have fees for the license transfers or renewals or anything, so we wouldn't have that income from a transfer to give to a creditor like the state does.
Okay. So is that enough of that? Do you have some guidance then?
I don't see that it's necessary on our end.
So we can
personally.
take this out. Okay. Well, and I schedule for that. There's no huge rush. Whatever. For our next meeting or after. Does that work? Okay. Is that enough on this? Any other thoughts on that? Okay. So moving on. Next item is proposed marijuana code changes to reflect changes recently made by the state. And that is these. Chris, do you have these?
Not handy in front of me.
Okay. And Andy, is this you?
Yeah. So this is just very straightforward, transferring over language that was applicable from the state statute update that took effect in February, and adding it in where we actually needed some of the most of the changes that the state didn't affect our code. So it can go through the beginning, and one of the changes there was a question about, and I contacted Jed, and so he can answer the question about the changes for the agent, and then splitting off each licensee and employee for the handler permits. So he can answer that one when we get to it. But so on the first one, 108015 for the license conditions, They updated the definition of resident of the state. And so I just carried that over into ours and updated it. We had mirrored theirs, and so now we're mirroring it still.
Spell check that.
Yeah, dividends are different.
Oop, yep.
So it could be different. We'll see what happens.
And
It's still
then,
right, actually, but.
that's why it didn't. That's why it didn't squiggle. And then the second one under 1080-036, I have a comment in here that I don't know if this is necessary. We recently redid our section of transfers, so it may have already covered this specific change. I have the code section over on the side that we kind of basically say the same thing. So I don't know if this is a necessary change or not. I was kind of leave that up to Dean and the committee to decide.
You know, like, you know, if someone's looking, do I need to renew my license? If they look here and it tells them I'm not active yet, so no. As opposed to, oh, let me find the answer somewhere else.
And the next.
You know, they would look for the answer here and not, you know, you don't search all of code looking for a different answer. So this seems just to clarify it. It was so simple.
Because, yeah, and it would be in the first portion of it. It's in the same section that we have that we just put it as D instead of A, so it's the last section of that.
So I got it.
So, I mean, it might be a little bit redundant, but it could be helpful to be in the first portion. And then,
So when you present this, can you give us the email or something, add it just to the document?
add it just
Well, you
to
know,
the
we
section.
just generally just show what's
Oh, sure.
changed, but if you show ABC,
Add
it's
it.
very long.
Sure, yeah. It's not, I don't think it's terribly long. I can put it.
So it give us more context.
Mhm. And then on the next page, section 3 was an entirely new section added, and this is dealing with a transfer of a license where there is no change to the operating plan. So instead of the applicant having to go through the entire transfer process, resubmit the exact same operating plans and the same product lists or whatever, this is allowing for a different type of report that would allow for the transfer of the license. And then I have some dots in here because I only found a few of our code sections that would reference those. So I just wanted to check with Dean and make sure we captured all of them. But and then the section 4 starts with the marijuana handler permit changes, and it captured that in a few different places. So it's adding the same language to each one where it references the handler permit. And this was where the agent and then each licensee and each employee kind of got separated out into different parts. And there was a question about it, so I don't know if Jed wants to take over and kind of describe why that change was made.
Talking about 320.
Yeah.
Can you sit up here, Jen? Just the record will get set up.
I mean, I can't necessarily speak for the board on this. This was a regulation that was adopted in the October meeting. It had gone out for public comment. The board vote was a little bit split on it. It was a 3-2 vote to adopt this, but nevertheless it was adopted, and the memo that accompanied this from the director said that the intention was to require everyone who's listed on a license to obtain a handler permit, regardless of whether they're required to be on the licensed premises or not. So the why to that is something that I'm not prepared to.
William, can you ask a question?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to understand this. So you're saying someone could be a part owner of a business,
Even up to like a 1%.
and could be, so like, are you telling me that like Andrew Hauker has to go get a marijuana handler's
He
permit?
does not have an active handler's permit at this time.
So Great Northern Cannabis with its 236 owners,
They all have to go get handler's permits.
Correct.
is there a fee?
Yeah, there's a fee to the course and a fee to the card. Yeah.
How much is it?
$50 for the card,
I think it's
55 for the
something
card.
like that.
It's 50 for the card.
And then the course fees range from
50.
40 to 60 to 75.
An additional fee for background check.
Yeah, 43, 70 or something like that.
Isn't there a background check on owners anyway?
Yeah, but you have to
Yeah, but
also
it's
do it
separate.
for employees. So the employees, so a handler has a different regulation to follow for how, what their disqualifying criminal issues are, and it's less stringent than the licensee one. So yeah, they gotta do it anyways, but they double do it.
So this passed, and this is state law, so anything that comes to us, all those owners have to have a handler's card. And
Correct.
we're just matching it here.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
I think that's sort of a silly regulation.
Yeah, me too.
And why do we have to match ours? You know, they have to go to the state and get it, and they have to come back to us, but why don't we just say, well, if you ever go back to a rational regulation, we're not gonna change ours. We're just gonna leave ours rational, and if you ever come back, we'll be good to go. You see what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think in this case, we don't have to really match. So there's some things we have to, but in this case, you do it for you, for our license, we don't require that.
Yeah.
Which is different.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there's two different kinds of marijuana handlers permits, one for active employees
No.
and one for owners.
No, there's just one handler permit program, and this regulation requires not just the employees and the owners that are directly involved in the operation of the business, but also any other investors that are listed.
Is
on the
there,
license.
can I ask a question? Is there a similar requirement for bars? So if you're a part owner of a bar, you need a TAMS card? Or whatever the equivalent would be?
If you serve, you need a TAM card.
Right, but if you're an investor in
No,
Sullivan's
you can be an owner and
Steakhouse,
not have a TAMS card.
what is silly regulation?
Okay, so, is that a yea or nay? Ma'am?
So one question, we can be more restrictive but not less. Does that fall into place with this? If we didn't follow that?
I would need to look into that a little further. I think that it's instinctively that's correct, but
Well, we can be less restrictive, how do I say it? We can be more restrictive, but if we're less restrictive, but having that license, the prerequisite for having our license.
Yes.
So in effect, we're not actually being less restrictive because they have to go through that anyway to get to us.
And this is our license, it's not, they're not saying, if the state told us our licenses have to do X, Y, Z, then we'd have to match it, but they don't do that.
Got it.
Chris, are you following on this okay?
No problems at all.
Okay, so I guess we're deciding, do we include this change that each licensee, in other words, each owner, has to have a handler's permit? And we're kind of getting to the point where we don't see why we need that for Anchorage. Do you have a feeling on that?
I tend to agree. With Great Northern as the example, there's like 40 of them, and that's just such a waste of time and resources if they're never going to handle anything.
I do kind of like the idea of Andrew Hawker having to sit in this class, but
I actually think that we ought to contemplate taking the class so we understand what it is.
Yeah, it's a thought, actually.
No, Patrick Flynn will have to do it too, huh?
He's got one.
Oh, he already has one?
Okay, so do you want to delete, move something forward without this section then?
I think I would prefer that. I do think that if there's a genuine like Mandy and Dean, there's a legal question we have to answer, which is there something about the way the state law is structured that says if you have your own licensing system, you have to do this?
So we could move it forward with it in there and then amend it out when it comes to the assembly too and have this discussion.
Yeah. Or we could leave it out and then wait for the state to, or someone else to come insist that we put it in.
It'd be odd though.
Yeah.
Why they would.
No, right.
Comment on that?
Yeah, please.
The only way that it would be in violation of the less restrictive, can't be less restrictive thing is if you were to specifically say that they're not required to. So by just not including it, you wouldn't be in violation of that.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I
So,
think it take it out.
Moves it from, okay, take it out.
So that same change would remove sections 4, 5, and 8.
Okay. Concision.
This is a pretty easy ordinance.
And so section 6 on page 3, part of it is that same change, and we can fix that, but they also added some extra language of who is required or permitted to be physically present on the licensed premises at any time. So we can change the one portion back to the original language that we had and just add in this underlined section minus the each employee and licensee.
I'm sorry, so you're looking at section 6, so we would delete that each licensee.
Yeah, so the last two, each licensee and each employee, we would take off and then leave it where the brackets are. But the extra language that's underlined was added as well.
Okay, I think in there too, a marijuana product manufacturing facility shall ensure that, I think you still need each agent.
Yeah, so it would be each licensee, employee, or agent who is required or permitted to
You
be
leave the
physically
existing
present.
language.
Yeah, so the existing language would be that first chunk.
But that's just for marijuana manufacturing, because they have to have the food safety worker training as well.
But also, so section 5, okay, so no change, and then here you're just changing the argument.
Adding some language.
Each licensee, employee, or agent who is required or permitted to be physically present on the licensed premises at any time, period.
So then it would be a colon, and then there's a 1, 2, 3. So I can add that in if you would like for context.
Yeah, that would be good. This is not going to be too lengthy.
Okay, and then section 7 is a new section added. Previously, the testing facilities didn't require the handler permit, and so the section 4 requiring the handler's permit for the other 3 licenses has been added into the testing facility license as well.
So the handler's permit was thought of just for retail use initially. Is that how it worked?
It was all
Broad
3.
use.
It was all
It was
3.
all 3?
Testing was the only one that
Okay.
wasn't.
The handler's permit allows, it just helps with the tracking through the inventory tracking system.
Oh, I
Just
see.
track
So
it back
that's
to
their
an
code
individual.
number and metric or whatever?
Right.
Is that really the main reason then? So they
I don't know the main reason, but that's certainly like one of the functions.
Okay, so is any thoughts on this section? And is this, but we'll delete each licensee, right, to make this conform.
Yeah, we could make the language where it says each licensee and then move or each agent, move the licensee and employee up to mirror our other language.
Okay, and then section 8 also. no
And
change.
that would have been removed with the other one.
Okay.
Okay.
Any thoughts on that?
And
Any
I
comments?
provided this as extra info if you wanted to read through it. It's highlighted the portions that were changed in the state. The cover is the ones that we added versus the ones we didn't, kind of the summary, so.
Dean?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think that we want to make sure we avoid any unintended consequences. If we edit the way we've just talked, just take out each licensee, we're left with each agent and employee, and we might then not be covering.
We weren't going to take that out. We were just putting it back to our original language.
Oh, well, I just want to make sure we don't miss licensees who have plans on work there on the facility. They're not employees and they're not agents, so they're licensee. So I might want to look at maybe some alternative language rather than just each licensee. So maybe each licensee except licensees who are silent partners or not involved or don't transport, handle, something like that. So I'm just saying we'll come back with maybe not exactly what you said, more edits,
Non-active, but just financial,
Is
just
there-
financial interest.
Do we have transfers coming soon? Or anything that's relevant?
I haven't received any controlling interest. We have a few pending that are non-controlling interest, which don't go before you until their renewal period, so.
So could you have something at end of March? Like, do we have another, we must have a meeting end of March.
We have, let's see, March 5th is the meeting, so this is our March 5th, so we won't have one until prior to the 19th. So whatever that Thursday is before the 19th.
Okay, is that enough time?
Sure.
Okay.
I believe so.
Well, let's see, but there's no critical timeline on this one either, right? Okay. Well, why don't you try to have it for that last meeting of March? We'll look at it again. Does that work? Okay. So next final issue on here is discussion of area restrictions on packaged liquor stores, and sadly we're missing Felix. Did you know we were doing this? Is he on the committee? Where's Felix?
No, he's not.
Tim, you want to see?
Dick's not here either. The other Midtown.
Sit next to him. No, you could stay back there.
Okay, so this has been on a slow burn with us for a while, and then I thought it was just lack of interest, and then it's not. Felix brought it back up as an In-N-Out Liquor, which has gone a little bit sideways, and Tim's still very interested in this, and Dan as well. So I think we need to. Do we just go ahead and get this in full play and see what happens? Or it's kind of sat in this form for a while. I guess, Dean, is this the most recent version?
I believe it is. We had sort of tabled it a while ago before I did any further edits, and I think that, I have some concerns that were raised at prior meetings of this committee regarding whether they have equal protection issues, whether it's arbitrary. And I recall that the owner or manager of La Bodega was here saying, why would they have to have restrictions? Because they're within an area that has a problem. They're not contributing to the problem because of the way they operate their business and products they sell. So there's a real element there, I think, that Mr. Coffey has mentioned before as well, maybe equal protection concerns. So I just advise caution in going forward, and I think there may be a process or system where we could look at negative effects in an area and conditions that we should impose, but we should be very cautious about eliminating an individual licensee analysis or examination of each individual licensee and whether they should have conditions or not.
So I can understand that, but we do it downtown. Why don't we face those same issues with the downtown?
I would say because it hasn't been challenged in the court.
Oh, really? Okay. Francis?
One might
Mr. Chair?
Can we go ahead? Go ahead, Chris.
We don't actually have explicit downtown restrictions. They're really on just the one store. And so they've, although been talked about as downtown restrictions for the longest time, it really was targeted only to the store directly across the street from the Captain Cook.
But this would apply to anyone down there, right?
Yeah, but we didn't levy those requirements in the past on, say, the new licensed store at the brewery or any other location. So just as a matter of record.
Oh, Dean.
there was another package store downtown that those restrictions apply to. Brown Jug on Fifth Avenue. So it's within that area. That's fine.
So if you're in downtown, these apply, right? 100%. Francis?
Oh, I was just going to point out it's kind of not an equal comparison to compare the concentration of alcohol licenses in downtown to just like all total number of licenses to the other parts of town, because I mean, was there 100 alcohol licenses in 10-block area in downtown and Midtown and other East Anchorage, where we don't have that concentration of overall alcohol licenses. So downtown is a little bit different in that it's sort of this intense area of commercial activity.
But this is just packaged liquor.
Fair enough,
So
yeah.
how many are downtown? Is that
Not
one?
many.
Not many.
I think 3.
3.
And 2 of them are within breweries, and so they don't really count. And so really there's just 1.
But if another one opened, they would be subject to these restrictions. Is that correct, Chris?
I don't believe that they would necessarily, because again, we have the one that just opened inside of the 49th state. None of these restrictions were levied on, even though it's a full package license. I think that the downtown adopted the posture that they're just going to take them on one at a time, but that came after many years of fighting and getting rid of half a dozen liquor stores.
Okay. Well, that worries me a bit. All right. Thanks.
I think you're kind of both right? Because the Title 10 downtown restrictions, I think Mr. Coffey would agree, apply across the downtown. The way that Mr. Coffey's nodding, the way that he understands it, I understand it, Dean and John, Mr. Weddleton, the chair. But the alcohol conditional use permit didn't try and mirror the Title 10 restrictions. So that maybe is the point of departure.
Okay. Interesting.
The special land use permit for alcohol or alcohol conditional use is dealing with the zoning aspect and not the licensing aspect. And changing an individual alcohol conditional use, for each individual license would be a big task. That's why it's all in Title 10, one place that applies area-wide. Do you understand? It would be a big deal to apply individual restrictions to every single alcohol conditional use or special land use permit. It would be a big job to update those prices and licenses for each individual one of these permits versus having to apply, everywhere per the alcohol section in Title 10.
Right. Thank you.
And if I could add just slightly to that, there's a function of the special land use permit, the conditional use permit as it used to be called, that's supposed to be specific to that operation. And if we're applying general conditions, then they actually, in a philosophical way and maybe a practical way, move from being special land use permit conditions to actual conditions of an area. And so it's likely better to be a different tool than adding conditions that are general to a specific license, rather coming up with a different set of processes. I don't know if I'm making any sense there, but there's just a difference, and I believe that the purpose of conditions is to be specific to the location. And so if we want to be moving general requirements, we should find a better way to do it, I think.
Chris, this is Tim Potter. I agree to some extent, but conditional uses, in many of them, they have general standards, and then they have specific standards for that specific conditional use. And in looking at this and trying to impose an area-wide, whether it's the entire city or a designated sub-area of the city, I think there's general conditions that should be required, and I also think there needs to be specific additional details given, because one person's necessary security or camera setup isn't the same as the other guy's. So if it's in a location where there's not a lot of places for people to hang out and do straw buying coordination, then that's different than some of the situations that we have where there's simply around the corner of the building a blind spot where people herd up and get straw buy deals all the time. So.
I don't disagree with that, and I think, though, that if we're going to talk about general restrictions, we should talk about them in the context of general restrictions and not in the context of special land use limitations on a license. I think that's, and I haven't read the ABC's decision yet, but where we're applying general conditions to an operation that they look specific because they're targeting that license, then you're going to run afoul. And there has to be a way we figure out where they fit in the cosmology of all the rules and apply them at a point where it's not specific, but it's general. And then it still does have the net effect of restricting that business in that area. It just isn't tied directly to those conditions on that license. You know, I think we have to come up with a better way.
Well, Chris, what we have in front of us is one that kind of extends that, like you have in downtown, there's area restrictions, which is just downtown. And this ordinance in front of us is a template for doing area restrictions in other places. So it would not be on their special land use permit, it would just be part of doing business in that area. It'd be assumed to be. So is that what you're saying we should do?
I believe it should be separate from the special land use rules on any given license, and it can be incorporated, but in order for it not to be arbitrary and capricious, it has to fit somewhere generally.
Okay, I think that's what we have here.
And I don't have it in front of me.
Okay, so I think yes, you're right, so that's what we have in front of us. So, okay, so the question is, we do this downtown. We have a suggestion to do roughly the same elsewhere. Is that what this comes to? And the question that's tricky is how do you draw those lines? And if we draw the lines poorly, then we run into arbitrary and capricious. Is that right, Steve?
Yes, I think that if you just say we're following the community council boundary, that doesn't really capture, I guess, we're trying to address a problem in an area. The problem is amorphous, right? Problems we're talking about of negative effects of chronic inebriation and the sales of cheap liquor. That problem isn't like going to conform to community council boundaries just because of that.
Okay, and we could, for each area, do different restrictions according to Part 3 here, right?
That was the idea. Yes.
This gets pretty arbitrary.
Yeah, I'm really, and I respect Mr. Potter and the work they've done in these particular cases, but I'm really hesitant to take this approach to do this. I feel like we are. What's that?
I just didn't hear you. You're really hesitant.
I started by saying I really respect Tim, and then I continued to say, and the work he has done in that community council. But I am worried about how this would apply in my district, and so I don't have intimate familiarity with everything having a Midtown Community Council. But if these tools were brought to some of my community councils, I'm thinking of one in particular, I could see them being used very aggressively, and the folks who frequent those stores are not necessarily some people who have a voice on those community councils, and I'm really curious to find out, and I haven't read it either. I'm really curious to find out why the restrictions on in and out were found to be arbitrary and capricious. Because to me, it makes sense that you put these restrictions on in cases where you have real evidence that something is happening, whether it was in and out or before the Northern Spirits. Yeah, I'm sorry, Mom and Pop's Spirits of Alaska. I mean, there are some pretty exceptional cases, I think, versus painting with a really broad brush. And I thought we had that evidence in and out, but perhaps the finding was that we didn't.
So, but I think with in and out, we did not specify anything. We just said we are protesting a pending a public hearing.
Okay.
So we gave no reason. We did not say because of
Gotcha.
XYZ.
I think you meant Mom and Pop's.
I'm confusing the two. Yeah, the first one was Mom and Pop's. The new one is in and out. Right.
So with in and out, we had a public hearing, and at the public hearing, we came up with restrictions, right?
It's mom and pops.
Mom and pops, I'm sorry, mom and pops. And that went to AMCO, and they said, okay, we'll put those restrictions on. But with in and out, because we didn't really give any reason, really. Is that
We
essentially
have
what
the
done?
deadline on the protest for the renewal, and in the past, we've done this as well, where we protested it pending either a continued public hearing or a continued review that the assembly. So we've done it in the past, and they had granted it before, but this time it was not granted.
I think if there
Mr. Chair?
I think if the other box on the protest and request for the delay would have been checked and filled out, and even if it had just said, please see previous action on mom and pops, that would have been potentially adequate. And I find it very frustrating, as I said Tuesday night, that the day before the assembly was going to take action and have a public hearing, that the ABC board and a very informed attorney expressed that it was arbitrary and capricious. And if everybody wants to turn a blind eye to the problems that all of us in Midtown are having, fine. But you have to give us a tool to do it one way. And I agree with Mr. Coffey. We wanted to do it on a broader area basis, if not the whole city, so that it was fair. And not one person over a 2-year period of time. The only way that we now have a tool is to review them on a case-by-case basis as they come up during that 2-year renewal time period. And if that's the only tool we have, then we have to figure out how to make that work. Now, is it fair for the guy like Eddie Lee at Mom and Pops to sit around for 2 years with those restrictions when the guy across the street has time to outcompete him and not be on a level playing field? It's not fair, it's not appropriate. That, in my view, is arbitrary and capricious. We need to figure out a way that we can take an area where, I'll take a little bit of exception, I believe that we're talking package stores, not bars, totally separate issues. And if you look at the concentration of packaged liquor stores in the broader Midtown, Spenard, North Star, and Rogers Park area, it's a huge number relative to what's downtown. And it's a totally different subject matter. And you must be blind, stupid, or whatever if driving around Midtown you don't see that there's issues that are different than everywhere else in town. We have a problem, and the rest of us are paying for that problem in additional security, problems, theft, everything else. And when you can sit at one location and watch people not purchase a product in one store because of the price and go directly across the street and buy the same product for 99 cents a bottle and walk out and become a problem, then it's pretty clear that pricing sensitivity is out there. Now, does that solve the problem? No. My biggest fear is that, yeah, we up the price on alcohol, and then, you know, Walmart gets hit with having to put mouthwash behind the counter. You know, so we as a broader community have a big problem that we need to try and figure out how to solve. But the Midtown Community Council, as well as Spenard, we're working together to try and formulate a consolidated deal where the package stores, the owners have to come to the community council and become part of the active community, at least on a quarterly basis. I don't think that's too much to ask. It's an entitlement, and they should be required to do something to participate. Because the problem that is caused by the alcohol sales of cheap alcohol does not stop at the door. So some responsibility has to be carried over. And, you know, I don't know exactly how to solve it, but I'm almost going to offer that Dan and I take the next 30 days and try and refine this to where it can actually work and meet. I think that we understand both sides and both ends of this spectrum and can do that.
Okay, thanks. Let me hold that.
Mr. Chair.
To Chris. Go ahead, Chris.
Yep, and you know, I find myself struggling on this in that the La Bodega example is super important, that any proposed generalized restrictions need to take into account specific business models that are functioning. I just hate the idea that we're going to use a blanket approach and actually harm businesses that are doing good in the community with a broad brush approach. And so that's my philosophical concern. I agree that it's a totally different situation downtown than it is in Midtown. In fact, it used to be like that downtown. It isn't anymore. The package stores are hyper-concentrated, and so we definitely have to address that question. And now, I think I heard Mr. Coffey in the room.
Yeah, I'm here, Chris.
Dan, were you testifying at the ABC hearing
Yes.
that resulted in the finding of arbitrary, capricious, and unreasonable?
Yeah, I have to represent my client, and you will all recall that when we brought this matter before you, there was an ordinance being prepared that would have, and I testified here in this room to that, and asked that it be adopted, or amended and adopted. I didn't much care, but it was to be so that you had a level playing field. And
Okay, so we can thank you for that, and then the next step, I think, then, Mr. Potter, would be let's look really carefully at creating specific records on specific operations of problems, photographs and everything. Let's start documenting them all these licensees that are creating problems. So in the face of a scenario where there isn't 6 votes for some area-wide effort, you have a case to be made for Mr. Coffey's clients that they're not being beneficial to the community and in fact creating harm. Because I think it's a really hard stretch of anyone's imagination to think that those operations are helping the community. And so I look forward to seeing that evidence, Tim.
Thanks. Let me work around.
You know, I would really hope, Chris, that that's not an attempt to kind of park the greater good of an actual ordinance. I mean, we'll do what we have to do to try and deal with the specific individual licenses, but you know, the assembly needs to let me know: are you serious about trying to do something? Whether some court and/or the ABC board finds an action arbitrary and capricious. This is your town. You get to make some rules. It can be handled from a zoning standpoint. You offer conditional use like you do in other cases, and there's several different ways to get there. And
I agree, Tim. I just say document, document, document.
Okay, hold on. Let me go around. I got some others. Francis?
One, I don't find it convincing for mom and pop liquor that they have special restrictions on their license that they have to deal with for a year while one of their competitors does not. I just don't find that argument convincing. Two, I think that the chair should be cognizant that one individual should not be allowed to filibuster this discussion and consume all the time speaking in our limited time.
Right, I understand. We do have some time though, so.
I want to hear from the...
Yeah, Sarah?
Yeah, so I would like to speak to the ABC board's decision. When I worked for AMCO as program coordinator, I came and I spoke with this group when Mr. Croft was here, and specifically cautioned this group about how the municipality had been using the protest tool as kind of a means to, I don't mean to sound accusatory, but it's kind of a means to get additional time to determine whether it wanted to protest or not. The state statute is very clear. It says that the municipality has 60 days to file a protest and to list the reasons for the protest. And so the reason for the ABC board's decision or finding that the protest that was filed for, was it in and out, was arbitrary, capricious, and unreasonable, was because the appearance was that the municipality's protest that went before the board was merely just saying, hey, we need more time than the 60 days that's allotted in the statute. So that's all that I have to say about that.
So in previous cases, it worked, but you're just saying we got lucky then.
Well, yeah, and I had come in and kind of cautioned about that because I knew that the board was talking about it a little bit, about how the municipality was doing that. So,
Okay.
This was just the first time that they've actually stuck to it.
Well, that's good. It's useful to know that. Thank you. Forrest?
I'm trying to think how that comment, that speaks in favor of having these kind of restrictions then. If we're not going to have as much time to actually work through these individual licenses, and we can't meet the, you know, the requirements of the state, then that speaks in favor of a tool like this that can put out more general license restrictions. I'm not sure that's what the alcohol industry intended by you know, by the testimony, but I think that's what it does. I will say with this ordinance specifically, in A, when it talks about how we set a geographic boundary, I mean, it's written in a way that's like, and this is no critique of, I don't know if this is you who wrote this, Dean, but it says, may coincide with a community council district or a general market area. I'm not sure what a general market area is, unless that's defined somewhere else in statute, but are not required to. So what we're saying basically there is it can look like anything, any size or anything. And that, I don't know, that we don't have a lot of statutes. I don't think we have a lot of statutes that give us that kind of authority. If that's the case, then we could draw the geographic area to be like half a city block and only apply to one liquor store. I'm not saying we should, but
Or we could draw the boundaries for the whole entire city of Spenard or something.
Or the whole municipality boundary.
What the problem is, as I understand the board was voicing, is not only what we just heard about the timeline and the extent, you know, saying we protest this because we need more time to do it. They don't like that. I understand it. We should get our business done in the 60 days. That's neither here nor there. On the broader scope situation, it is, if you think about it, it addresses, in this case, package stores that are actually doing something that is determined to be adverse to the community. Making special availability of cheap alcohol to inebriates would be a standard. And those who aren't doing that are not impacted one whit by a geographic imposition. Those that are. And what you've done then is you have not just taken, if you wanted to do all the package stores in the Midtown area that Tim is talking about, and you did them one a year, every year, you'd be a decade in here getting this done. So this has that benefit. It doesn't in any way stop you from protesting a renewal based on things that are other than the marketing sort of assets, things that actually in other ways are demonstrable. He's selling to minors. There are, you know, other things of that nature. I think both tools are available, like Tim said, and I think that's what we ought to figure out, how to do those that are broad and those that are targeted. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Just, now we've had from some industry people, if you're going to do it, do the whole city, and not these little areas. Because
well,
they don't go to
different,
Midtown, then they're going to go to South Anchorage. They'll pick it up just at a different brown jug or at a different, I don't even know what the liquor stores are. So you just move it. And is that, I mean, what's your sense? Are you here to speak to us or to listen only?
So, as for our operation in particular, I'll only speak to our operations, we have seen, they just move. They just move to a different area. So I do have 2 stores that have different restrictions on them, and I have watched my competitors pick up all of that business. So all of the high octane beer that I no longer sell in the Mountain View area, which is fantastic for our relationship with that community, you know, who there as part of our licenses. I have watched competitors within walking distance, not in the Mountain View community area, now sell 3 times, 4 times their agreement product in my pallet. Because the high octanes type alcohol is available somewhere else, they just go somewhere else. Whether it's on the bus route or within walking distance of the stores.
Mm-hmm.
So if you wanted to do area-wide restrictions, to be fair to the entire industry, it should be across the city.
This is, thank you. This is interesting. So we have here 2008, but it's roughly close enough to be current. So it's 2008. But it shows liquor license. This is all licenses, though, not just package.
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay. Look, the hillside is free.
Yeah.
Lucky John, they call him.
Well,
John has a little experience with liquor licenses. It's coming. It's new.
what are the, oh, those are schools.
Schools. So you have downtown, but this is all liquor licenses. Well, look what we'll do. Party Central.
Sure.
So Midtown is fairly clear. I mean, you always have some issue where you're close to something else.
Midtown is concentrated, right? I mean,
You can definitely see it right there, other than this right there.
that's Diamond right there.
The Diamond Center in there somewhere. Yeah, where is there? Yeah, there's Abbott's. That's Diamond Center. Yeah, it's interesting. Dean, thoughts?
Not at this time.
So,
I think we need to look into this more.
With marijuana, we just have a requirement. If you have a retail operation, you have to go to the community council and get an MOU. And we've talked about, we can regulate marijuana like alcohol, now we're going the other way, regulating alcohol like marijuana. I mean, is that a simple starting place? It's just to say, take that marijuana language, put it in alcohol thing, and say, you need an MOU with the community council.
But we don't,
That's part of it.
we don't require MOUs, right? They're supposed to get one, but
For licensing.
You're required to do a public meeting, but not have an MOU.
we don't give the community council veto power over marijuana licenses, and with good reason, because there are some that just under no circumstances will vote for it.
But the MOU is typically, you could say is you just want to have a contact number, who to call in case there's an issue. I mean, they're very, very simple. So
But we'll
can we start with Francis?
They are required. The MOU is a template that's provided to them as a format for the benefit of the applicant and the community council, but they're required to prove that they've done community engagement. We've set a bar pretty high. So you're all right, but I think the applicant, the marijuana industry would say that they are required to prove that they've done community engagement and provide an MOU if the community council allows it. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, it would be nice, just as a side note, if the muni would tell the community councils generally, hey, the MOU that the marijuana establishment brings you is not some document that we created, that the muni created. Because I was at Sand Lake, the client member was at Sand Lake Community Council, and I was actually out of town, and that's my personal community council, and they were told by the president's husband, who's a lawyer, that, well, Janice should know better. This MOU is illegal. We can't sign this with it. And I'm just like, I didn't create it. So it'd be nice to have that little communication. And I'll
Tell Mike to back up.
Is it illegal?
It's not illegal.
What's illegal in it?
There's nothing illegal about it. The guy just didn't think that it's overkill. Da, da, da. I'm like, I didn't write it.
Well, but that's something particular about the
Yeah.
political dynamics of the
Right.
chair of the Sand Lake Community Council president.
That's true. There's a lot of things particular about
I mean,
Mandy?
So maybe Title
Mr.
21
Chair?
is different, but Title 10 doesn't require the MOU. It requires proof of community engagement. So the MOU, I think, is a easy way to show that, but the template of the MOU was a courtesy that was provided for the industry because that was something that the industry asked for. But it's not a requirement. It's just it's an easy tool that the applicants can provide to show that proof.
Rezone, replat, everything else, there's a requirement that there be a public meeting, whether it's at the community council or a special public meeting, so that there is some applicant and neighborhood or community discussion. And I agree with Forrest that there are places in town where if you had to have an MOU signed with the community council, it would never
Right.
happen. So I don't want to go that far. It's nice, but I think there does need to be a requirement for discussion, and we've set that up through all of our land use related stuff. I'm not trying to filibuster the meeting, so don't worry about it. But again, I'll say,
Mr. Chair?
I think that it would be very helpful if you would give Dan and I 30 days, and we'll come back with revisions and recommendations on this that we consider for the group's review.
Okay, thanks. Chris?
Yeah, the comment that was made about the community council that was advised it's not legal for them to be in an MOU, there are rules that say community councils can't sue or be sued, and so it's not hard to imagine them extrapolating that idea that they can't enter into any legal arrangements. But what we've stated all along is these tools aren't. They're just neighborly agreements. They're not legal documents.
Thank you. Let me go. Ford?
So I'm all for Mr. Coffey and Mr. Potter going and working on this more. I think that's great. I would recommend they come back in 33 days or a little bit later after that, because in 33 days we're going to have we'll know. I mean, look, if the issue is cheap liquor being sold in places, we are about to have a area-wide restriction in the form of an alcohol tax. It's going to be voted on, on April 2nd. So I'm curious to see how that debate plays out. And I think that we should frame this, we should consider this after that has either passed or failed. Because look, again, they're making an argument here that like cheap, high-octane liquor, to use the phrase that was used, is the problem. Well, it's a marginal increase in price, but there is going to be an increase in price on all liquor in the city. And one of the advocates, one of their main argument was this is going to impact mostly underage drinking and really heavy drinkers. So.
Mr. Chair, one last sidebar, if I might. I just think that in the future, at least until such time that these ideas are adopted, if we have a license that we have asked to put restrictions on comes up, that we ensure that we have a staff member at the AMCO hearing to advocate, because a one-sided debate is almost always going to go towards the one who's allowed to debate. And so I don't want us to lose by not showing up again.
Thank you. Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I thought that we have had community councils that have been not signing any MOUs, didn't want to be seen as being pro marijuana development of businesses in their area or whatever. So what has happened is they've just the licensee applicant has just gone to meetings and verified that they were at the meeting and presented at the meeting, and we've allowed that to go forward as, you know, reaching the goal of there being some sort of community meeting that they attended. Whether that particular community council signs an MOU or not signs it.
Can I ask an alternate approach to this from Mr. Coffey and Mr. Potter? So, I mean, looking at this map, it does seem like Midtown is sort of uniquely concentrated in the way that downtown is. Have you thought of, rather than opening Pandora's box and giving us this, you know, this tool that we could use anywhere, why not create a section of code like this downtown community council district for Midtown? I mean, why not?
That's what it opens the door for. You would add a section of code for each area.
Well, no, we could just do that. My point is, like, this sort of sets out a process by which we could do that over and over and over again. But clearly it's already happened at least once in downtown. So why not just do it again for Midtown and then you could be very specific about what the boundaries are, because maybe the Midtown boundaries won't actually look like the Midtown Community Council. They'll look like some other, you know, logical geographic boundaries. And then we don't have to have this tool sitting on the books that could be potentially used or misused in other parts of town.
I think that could be easily handled with defining what the word reasonably means in this context. And I envision that it will not just be the Midtown Community Council, it will be a joint map that will express a significant amount of Spenard Community Council,
right.
Midtown Community Council, North Star, and Rogers Park.
Right. And
Mr. Chairman, one of the things that what Forrest has just suggested was because different parts of town suffer from different consequences. Mountain View is not Midtown. East Anchorage is not Midtown. So when we originally talked about area-wide things, we focused on areas that were experienced the same sort of problems and addressed that area. The whole of the city is, I think, inappropriately addressed by one set of rules.
Thanks. Francis?
One alternative view would be that if you do this for another part of town, like say Midtown area, sub-area of town, that other sub-areas of town will see that and ask for it as well.
Yeah.
Maybe Government Hill would, maybe the Hillside would. Another issue is that you know, this is still not dealing with individual problem operators, and instead, you know, sort of treating individual problem operators or applying those sorts of rules to good operators as well, and it's sort of unfairly punishing them, as well as you know, potentially, you know, the problem operator may not follow these rules.
Right, yeah, thanks. So it is tricky that way. Sarah, did you have comments? Were you waiting?
I kind of. I am certainly not in favor of the wording that's proposed here. I think that you would have to set the lines so weird to carve out businesses that in itself would be arbitrary and capricious. Additionally, if you were going to do something that was area-wide, you would have to write something in there that would provide exemptions for businesses that maybe provided a robust security plan or something that showed that they weren't catering toward minors or inebriates or that kind of thing. And then just one comment about the protest process. There was a regulation that went into effect 2 days after the ABC board meeting, where they determined that your protest was arbitrary, capricious, and unreasonable. That clearly allows for a municipality to file a conditional protest. So I don't know how that will change. I'm sure that will change things, but it was not effective yet at that ABC date.
Okay.
So
that's our little leeway there. I think the issue is that we didn't give any reasons, and if we had given some reasons, we might have had.
Yeah, I mean, we listed second public hearing and final action on the license, which we have done in the past, and I mean, I agree. So if I could, kind of speaking to the protest process as well, in an ideal situation, the community councils get sent notice on or before September 1st of each year of our anticipated renewals for that licensing period. And so I think the process had been set up so that from September 1st until October 15th, the councils had the opportunity to submit a council resolution requesting public hearings on any of those proposed renewals. And so we would have an extended period of time for the councils to collect facts and findings and show documentation of issues that they're having. And then by the time we would get the renewal application, we'd have those 60 days. We'd have all of this documentation and all of these reasons to protest it. So I think in an ideal situation, it's not a limited amount of time. I think just the way life plays out, it ended up being that way in this circumstance. But the way it's laid out now does offer a very good amount of time to get to that protest.
Shit, that's in September, so why did we deal with it now? That hit us, this is February, so we didn't see it.
So it depends on when the renewal is submitted and when we receive it as well. So we know which licenses will be expiring at the end of the year, and so we send out notice, these are the ones we anticipate to receive.
Months in advance,
Yeah.
we meet the community council schedule.
Yeah.
Okay, and this, okay, well, that's good to know.
So then once we do receive that application, we've already received notice from the councils that they would like to request a public hearing on it. So we know that as soon as we receive that renewal, we can start that process. So I mean, ideally, that's how it would play out, but.
Okay, so we have a kind of two parallel discussions. How do we deal with protests? But I think we're fine tuning that. But then we have this area of restrictions, and we have an offer from Tim and Dan to look more closely at this. And that sounds fine to me. I'm back in
We'll
sooner than
make it
33
35
days.
days.
35.
Dunbar.
And I'd be interested. I mean, really, the thing is, how do you draw those lines?
Well, in the downtown area, at the time it was drawn back in 09 or 010, when this ordinance in this current draft was adopted, there were several, I can't remember the number, but there was a multitude of package stores in the downtown area. So the application was far wider spread. Now we're down to the one that's left, which is a Brown Jug down there. But the point being is that we were able to sort of define it, and it was by the basis of the location of the licenses more than anything else. And my view is that the board would like the idea of the ABC board would support the idea of a set of rules that apply in a geographic area where there's concentration of sources of alcohol. And truly, those who operate in an appropriate manner and don't cater to the chronic public inebriates, they're not going to be impacted one whit. So they'll be fine with something, assuming what's written, but they should be just fine with it. It won't affect their business.
Right. You know, downtown, the
Mr.
reference
Chair.
map has a nice clean
Oh, yeah.
buffer, you know, so that makes it much easier.
That thing's
2008.
Yeah.
Forrest?
Well, I guess it matters what kind of restrictions you put on it, right? Because the labeling restrictions, placing a sticker on every product, that would impact everyone, even your good operators.
Yeah, there's some, but they're insignificant in most regards. A lot of that's
Mr. Chair.
already there.
Hold on. Okay. Chris?
Yeah, I think that it's an easiest presumption to make that the restrictions wouldn't impact your good operators, but as Mr. Coffey carefully stated, that depends on what restrictions are written.
Yeah.
And the single package issue is one that cuts deeply, right? So if you just try to sell a bottle and you restrict the sale of a single bottle, then you have a whole line of products that get kicked out of a good operator. And so what matters really isn't that we assume they'll be fine, but what's written on the page.
That's good. Thank you, Chris. Francis?
I recall the owner of La Bodega, Pamela Heitzis, testifying before this committee that the requirement to label each individual product that she sells would require her to hire an additional person, which may be a larger burden for her than some of the other franchise liquor stores. Her margins are smaller.
You could. As a retailer, I mean, you can get price labels that have your name on it.
She also said that she could try and turn it into a marketing pen for her.
Mandy?
Can I ask a question of Francis?
Sure, please.
So I know that historically the land use permits have been like land use conditions. Is that codified, or is that just kind of how we've always done it?
You're saying the conditional use or special land use permit?
Yeah.
And your question is?
So if other conditions were put on it that aren't necessarily like zoning, is that prohibited by Title 21, or is that just kind of something that we've always done, that we've like separated conditions that tend to be more land use versus conditions that tend to be more like operational and license? So I guess would we be prohibited from using?
The answer is no. It's the way that Mr. Potter has described, that special conditions about the operation could be placed on an individual special land use permit for alcohol or alcohol conditional use. That could happen. What's sort of interesting though is that the new applications coming. There's so many alcohol establishments across town that are existing, and there are so many licenses in general that just converting each individual one is pretty tricky. Whereas we have this system already set up where annually we have 300 or 600 alcohol licenses that come up, and Title 10 has a section on alcohol licenses that is kind of applied to a larger group. So it's just
Okay. Thanks.
John, because there's been a concern expressed about La Bodega, we were pretty careful in kind of constructing the original language that we tried to do, in that I don't believe that they have a single bottle sale price that enters any of what we're talking about. I shop at La Bodega, and I typically, if I'm either gifting bottles to someone, it's usually a mixture of a sampler type. And you can spend a lot of money on single beers at La Bodega, and that's why I'm pretty convinced they don't have a product and a single beer or fortified beer anywhere close to the prices that we're talking about. So, that in and of itself, I think is fine. But no, I would not want to restrict a business that is done as exceptional as they are. So that's one of the caveats we want to make sure that we're we're making clear, is that we want to go after a certain specified thing and a certain type of operation, and recognize there definitely are spin-off impacts on the rest of the community.
So, can I ask a question? The B1A here, no cheap wines. This is a white port in any size. I'm sort of shocked at that. So we're talking about the specific kind of conditions. I'm shocked that that is like legally sufficient to be like, is a barley wine a cheap wine, right? Because I think they sell barley wine in La Bodega.
These are rules that are associated with the downtown restrictions.
I don't know what a white port is. Yeah, I mean, I guess my point is, the broader point there is that, and I think Chris is kind of alluding to this too, you know, industries change and there are innovations and there are changing tastes, and you know, we have to write them in a way that is specific enough to understand, but not so specific that folks are prevented from doing that natural evolution of a business. And I mean, I've expressed before my sort of general hesitancy to do any of these kind of restrictions. I don't think they work very well. But if we're going to do them, then I just hope we do them very well.
And just to follow up on that, it's really the price per ounce.
Well, we're about to increase the price per ounce.
And percentage of alcohol. So that's why you see in the 50 milliliter bottle, it's really set at about $1 per fluid ounce of alcohol.
Okay, we got 5 minutes left. I got a couple. Francis?
Yeah, just that there are always new products that come out on the market. Now there are, you know, wines and cans, and there's next, who knows what it'll be, and they do maybe specialize in high content stuff, and the particular business which is unique that La Bodega does is they sell individual and mix and match and things that some of the other things do. So just to sort of further some of what Dunbar was saying.
Good, thanks. Sarah?
Yeah, also to speak to that, Double Shovel Cider Company is considered a winery by state definition. So they produce things that are sold in individual containers that may be sold for less than $10 a bottle. They make like a rosé cider that I believe sells for.
Thanks. Dan?
Mr. Chairman, there's no question that this is a difficult and it varies impacts broadly, and it's just hard to do. So one of the things I'm going to suggest to Tim is that, look, we identify those big problems that exist, and then say, well, now how do they fit in this geographic or that geographic or whatever, so that it's got to be focused, but it also has to take into effect what Forrest said, that if you do it to people who are not selling the things that mom and pops can't sell, but they're selling other things that people don't like, then they're impacted too. So I understand what he's saying. So understand that we've got I call it a Sisyphusian task. It's a steep hill and a big rock to push over the top.
Yeah,
So
but the story of that, the moral of that story is you can never win. That it's like impossible.
well, that's probably the case with, unless we address the public inebriate problem of the street people in other fashions.
Yeah.
They're going to be in our community, and it's not going to be a good thing.
It's on the ballot.
Yeah, we're
Okay,
punishing businesses.
so where we're leaving off then with this one is Dan and Tim will go figure out a way to define boundaries, give us some more information on maybe what products, and do some research.
Yes,
and that's
sir.
very generous of you two to do
And,
that.
and focus on the midtown area, if you would, right?
Start there.
As an example.
I don't mean a midtown community.
No, I think that's, if that's going to be the model that we're going to try and perfect this to, that others might use, then it's fine. And we will try and construct it based on our experience and expertise to make it work.
Okay.
Thank you, Paul.
So I think we're
Mr.
good.
Chair, I'm less concerned about the boundaries than I am about the restrictions. That's where I would recommend people spend the most of their time.
Probably so, unless it's a line and you have one on one side of the street and another on the other, you've got
Yeah.
problems. So.
Well, but the boundaries will sort when we have restrictions. That's my point.
Okay, good. Thanks, Chris. Anything else? We got a minute? All right, done.